Okay, well, we started spring at 1:24 this afternoon here in the Anchorage, or actually all across the world today. So the day lengths are roughly, give or take, 12 hours in length everywhere in the world. And we're already a couple hours into the first part of spring. And satellite imagery showing big storm, intense storm rolling up to the northeast here, really hammering St. Matthew Island, and now has been hitting St. Lawrence Island pretty good as well, up into the Bering Strait. Blizzard warnings out there. A lot of gusty winds, 40 to 65, in some cases almost 70 miles an hour at St. Paul earlier today, and a good batch of snow showers rolling in toward the southwest coast there in over the eastern Bering Sea. Front really breaking up as it weakens as it comes eastward here. Just a lot of mid and high level clouds spilling into the Cook Inlet area. Could be a little bit of light precipitation along this, but nothing heavy as a new development starts down here, and then this low center pulling back. This area of the front really starting to stretch out and weaken. Pretty good conditions off to the east here. A trough out of the Yukon extending down across the southeast coast, creating some shower activity there, cloudy skies. And out to the west, another system starting to develop there over the Shimia area, and that's forecast to track due eastward and bring some pretty good gusty winds in over the eastern Aleutians, Alaska Peninsula later tonight, or actually for tomorrow, and into the next day. Otherwise, this big storm again bringing gusty winds all across the western interior, anywhere from 40 to 50 miles an hour along the southwest part of the state today. Northward there, Tin City had peak wind gusts 67 miles an hour this afternoon. Winds on the increase here across all of the northwest interior areas. And due to that, we've got blizzard warnings continuing tonight into tomorrow here for the St. Lawrence Island area, Bering Strait coast, and including the Nome area, and winter storm warning out for the Yukon Delta tonight into tomorrow as well. That's all for heavy snow and blowing snow, reduced visibilities, whiteout conditions at times with gusts anywhere from 40 to 60 miles an hour, and then winter weather advisories here over the western interior, Galena up into the Kobuk Valley, Noatak Valley, northwest coast, Kivalina to Kotzebue up to about Point Hope, and also in the Kuskokwim Valley there, or not in the Kuskokwim Valley, the lower Yukon Valley, Grayling there over towards Stebbins. And on the chart today, there's that low weakening from about 957 millibars earlier today to about 961 millibars there this afternoon as it passes just west of St. Lawrence Island, and snow and blowing snow all through this area here, and diminishing winds and snow here, or snow showers, areas of lighter snow down in toward Bristol Bay and Kodiak Island, and possibly coming into the southern Cook Inlet area, but nothing too heavy reported so far, and some clouds and a little bit of light snow up into the Prince William Sound area, but the interior here looking pretty good. There's that next storm out to the west that we'll see tonight, moves eastward here to just southwest of the Pribilofs there. That'll bring an enhanced area of rain and snow into the central Aleutians, along with a little bit of an increase in the winds. This low slowly weakening, pulling up into the Russian Far East there. Otherwise, snow and blowing snow continues tonight with a blizzard warning. St. Lawrence Island starts to improve over the Yukon Delta late tonight, but the western interior here pretty snowy and windy, all the way up to the Noatak Valley, western Brooks Range. And a weak low develops here, and that'll increase the chances of snow tonight over south central Alaska, especially in the Prince William Sound. and down along the eastern and southern Kenai Peninsula into Kamishak, Kachemak Bay areas, and some no change here over the eastern interior. This trough kind of slips off to the east-southeast and weakens, so it should become dry. The shower activity will end over the southeast coast tonight, and I'll continue through most of the day tomorrow. This trough will spread chance of rain and snow showers into the extreme northern panhandle, along the North Gulf Coast into Prince William Sound. A little bit of lingering snow shower activity here over the western interior. More of a light snow situation along the west coast, and then that's next system we'll see from tonight deepens pretty well. Got much tighter pressure gradient, so looking at good northwest winds, possibly 40 to 65 miles an hour in gusts here for the eastern Aleutians tomorrow, and some snow with that spreads into Kodiak Island late in the day. Light snow mostly over the southern island, and then for the next day, Wednesday, some increasing moisture there into the panhandle, snow across south central Alaska extending northwestward here along this trough axis. Strong gusty northwest winds, again possibly up to 60 miles an hour with snow down to sea level for the Alaska Peninsula, but better conditions out to the west. Lows tonight in the 30s for the panhandle, otherwise teens and 20s elsewhere, followed by highs tomorrow in the 30s just about everywhere here over the interior of the state, and mid-40s or anywhere in the 40s for the panhandle. Looks like Skagway up to close to 50. Lows the following morning in the 30s for the southeast coast, teens and 20s here for the remainder of the interior, southern interior. Highs on Wednesday in the 30s, except 40s to near 50 for the southeast coast. And up to the north, lows tonight, single numbers in teens to the east, upper teens to near 20 in the west, and the shade below zero for the portions of the Arctic coast. Highs tomorrow into the 30s, central interior, upper 30s here in toward the mid-Yukon River Valley and down toward McGrath. Otherwise chillier, of course, up along the Arctic coast, followed by lows 5 to 15 over the interior, and closer to zero for the North Slope and Arctic coast, followed by highs upper 20s to mid-30s, central interior 5 to 15 to the north, and the southwest coast tonight, lows in the 20s, otherwise 30s for the Aleutians, highs in the 30s for the Aleutians, followed by lows in the lower 30s and highs in the lower 40s.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
And tomorrow's aviation showing areas of IFR here across interior Alaska with some areas of VFR as well, and also some areas of marginal VFR, especially over the west. That's where the lowest conditions will be, right on across the Kuskokwim Valley to the western Alaska Range in toward northern Bristol Bay. IFR here, North Gulf Coast, some IFR over the northern Panhandle, otherwise some VFR out toward the coast and to the south, and then things improve as you head west over the Bering Sea and the Aleutians. For the afternoon, the VFR for Kodiak Island goes marginal, and VFR here, Kenai Peninsula, Cook Inlet, and then you get into marginal VFR from Turnagain Arm northward, Kuskokwim, or into the valleys, areas of anyway, mostly VFR north of the Alaska Range over the eastern interior, VFR north of the Brooks Range to the Arctic coast and beyond, and still some IFR here off the southwest coast and along the Alaska Peninsula. Otherwise, mostly marginal out over the Bering Sea. Not too bad for the Aleutians, though, as well as Nunivak Island looking pretty good. Down to the Pribilofs, could be VFR Tuesday afternoon. And for the morning, some VFR here over the eastern and northern Bering Sea, St. Lawrence Island into the southwest coast. Otherwise, big area of IFR over the interior with some VFR, better conditions south and east of the Alaska Range. Then more IFR here along the North Gulf Coast into the Barren Islands, southern eastern Kenai Peninsula, Resurrection Bay. Kodiak Island also IFR, northern Panhandle IFR, marginal to the south. And for the afternoon, not much change here for the southeast coast, still IFR over the northern areas, marginal VFR with some VFR to the south, and a little bit of VFR here. Looks like northern Cook Inlet into the Susitna Valley, but more so here north of the Alaska Range, and also out to the west some VFR into Bristol Bay. A little marginal there from the Yukon Delta coast up the Bering Strait, St. Lawrence Island, occasional marginal VFR, as well as most of the Aleutians, Alaska Peninsula, marginal VFR, and then next batch IFR pushing into Chimionette too. For passes tomorrow, looks pretty marginal, most of the passes. Anaktuvik and Adigan, marginal VFR. Lowest conditions to the south, better to the north. Lake Clark and Merrill look occasionally marginal throughout the day on Tuesday, as does Rainy and windy. Marginal VFR as well. Higher conditions out the north entrance, lower conditions on the southern approach. And for Isabel, mostly marginal tomorrow. For Mentesta, same forecast, occasional marginal VFR. And for Tanita, Tuesday looking marginal. Portage, same forecast, marginal VFR for Portage on either approach, and Chilkoot and White, IFR. For the freezing levels, tomorrow morning at the surface, across the Bering Sea, near or just north of the Pribilofs, northern Bristol Bay, across southern Alaska here. 2,000 feet over the southern southeast coast, or I should say 2,000 to 4,000 feet down there. And for icing, got some isolated moderate rime icing here for the North Gulf Coast, possibly as far west as Whittier or Portage, but mostly along the coast here into the northern panhandle. Then a heavier batch down here along the Alaska Peninsula. Could be an area of considerable moderate there, mostly along the south coast of the Alaska Peninsula. Otherwise, nothing significant for the remainder of the state over the interior as well as out over the Bering Sea. And going to, let's see, the jet stream here. Trough from the Russian Far East all the way down to the southeast Bering Sea here. So on the west side of that trough, good northwest flow, 100 to 115 knots there, right across Adak and Atka. Taking a turn to the north here, then really diminishes, 65 to 85 knots here, western Alaska Range to just south of Kodiak Island. And at 9,000 feet, 70 to 75 knot northwesterlies over the western Bering into the west central Aleutians. Lighter winds here over southern Alaska and the Gulf, south 40 knots there from Norton Sound up to the northwest coast. And then pretty light over the eastern interior. A narrow area of, or small area of 40 knot southwest winds there coming across the North Gulf Coast, that mostly into Canada. 3,000 feet, pretty light winds over the interior here down along the southeast coast and into the Gulf. Strongest winds. Well, up here to the north, Point Hope, Cape Lisburn, 35 out of the south, 70 knot northwest winds right across the eastern Aleutians, 50 knots for Adak and Atka. And with those windy conditions for the Aleutians, moderate turbulence from the western Alaska Peninsula all the way out to Kiska Island, as well as up here along the northwest coast and Seward Peninsula.
Here at the end of the Earth, it still feels like a place for raw exploration and adventure. It's vast in all directions and ground zero for some of the biggest questions we have about the climate. But when we decided to make a series about the frozen places on Earth, we knew there would be one hurdle we would need to jump over first. What is the cryosphere?
The what?
Ooh.
I have no idea.
While I'm aware of the cryosphere, I don't actually know what it is.
It has something to do with ice. All right, that's all I got.
How do you get people acquainted with the cryosphere when most of us don't even know what it is?
So here we are in Washington, D.C., standing on the roof of NASA headquarters. That's the Capitol building right behind me. And what headquarters does is kind of serve as the focal point to connect the dots.
That's Dr. Tom Wagner, NASA's cryospheric program scientist at headquarters. In short, Tom is responsible for making sure NASA knows what the current status of the cryosphere is.
The cryosphere is everything from the snow that falls by your house to the icy reaches of the Himalayas, to the big ice sheets of Antarctica all the way at the South Pole, and also the frozen ground of the Arctic, and even some of that frozen ground that's currently under the ocean.
If you had to break it down, you'd have a mix of sea ice, snow cover, permafrost, ice sheets, and glaciers.
Right now, our best predictions are that sea levels will rise anywhere from 1 to 3 feet within the next 100 years. 3 feet of sea level rise has the potential to displace about 100 million people, which is a lot of people that need to find new homes.
Our current reality places us at a near tipping point, and the cryosphere is playing a huge part in that delicate balance.
So one of the things people don't know about NASA is that we study the Earth, and we've been doing that since NASA's inception back in the 1950s. And we study the frozen part of the Earth in a variety of ways.
Missions like SNOAX, Airborne Snow Observatory, Oceans Melting Greenland, Operation Icebridge, Arctic Boreal Vulnerability Experiment, and countless other labs and individual researchers stand at the forefront of monitoring the cryosphere. But this year was a particularly big year.
3, 2, 1, and liftoff of Grace Follow-On, continuing the legacy of the Grace mission of tracking the movement of water across our planet.
2 state-of-the-art satellite missions are being launched in a single year as part of a major attempt to understand Earth's frozen places. Our scientists are answering hard questions, sharing stories from the field, and giving their best predictions for what we can expect of a warming world. We're taking you with us as we follow NASA explorers on their journey to the frozen ends of the Earth as they study our rapidly changing world from satellites, planes, and boots on the ground.
What we can do really well from orbit is we can tell when a surface of land is covered in snow. What's tricky is, though, how thick is that snow? And it's even trickier how much water is in that snow.
What we think of snow depends a lot on where it falls. If you live in the eastern US, maybe it's fun. Or maybe it's just a pain.
But if you live in parts of the world where they depend on the water that's in the snow for a large fraction of their total water that they use for drinking, for agriculture, for industry, or for hydropower, the snow is a very important natural resource. For example, in the western part of the United States, 80 to 90% of their renewable water comes from snow.
Snow is one part of the cryosphere that many of us have actually encountered before, but it also plays a critical role in regulating the Earth's climate. Through decades of remote sensing, NASA has kept a close eye on the ebb and flow of snow cover.
We now have a 52-year record of snow cover in the Northern Hemisphere, and we can see changes in the extent of snow cover over the time period, particularly in the last few decades, where we can see that the snow cover has been retreating. It's been melting a lot earlier in the springtime.
The extent is relatively easy to do, and it has been done over the years. What's tricky is, though, how thick is that snow? And it's even trickier how much water is in that snow.
That tricky part is known as the snow-water equivalent, or how much water would actually be in a layer of snow if it melted. NASA and its partners have taken to the air to help solve this elusive mystery. First, there's the Airborne Snow Observatory, or ASO, a small plane outfitted with a couple of instruments, one of which measures snow depth using LiDAR. LiDAR measures distance using light from lasers. Since 2014, ASO has flown over basins in California and Colorado, taking before and after looks at snow depth. Scientists subtract the snow-free summer data from the snow-on winter data to get an idea of the snow depth. The There's no single way to measure all types of snow across the globe, and so NASA's other airborne campaign, SnowX, is testing different combinations of sensors. This winter, SnowX will test a new instrument, the Snow Water Equivalent Synthetic Aperture Radar and Radiometer, or SWISAR.
SWISAR consists of two main components, one of them being the radar and the second one being the radiometer.
So with the radar providing the depth of the snow and the radiometer providing the density of the snow, we could put those two things together and get the snow water equivalent. Here in the chamber, we're going to measure different radiation patterns at our different frequencies and do some full system testing in this chamber. This chamber kind of enables us to isolate various types of radiation and interference. And in about a month, we're going to take the instrument, mount it on a twin otter in the Grand Mason, Colorado, and we're going to fly it over the Grand Mason, takes various different measurements. This is what we call our engineering flight.
Making sure the sensors are calibrated is key in order to face the challenges nature will throw at them.
Half of the area that gets covered by snow every winter contains trees and forest. And the trees make it difficult for the sensors to see the snow that's underneath the trees, so it makes it difficult for us to measure how much snow there is. After the snow's had a chance to sit on the ground for a while, it gets denser and denser and denser over time, and it changes, which is another reason why snow is very challenging to remotely sense. It doesn't stay the same. It's constantly changing. One of the things that we often do in the field is go dig what we call a snow pit. We literally dig a pit in the snow so we can see all the different layers. The layering is very important.
All this digging is part of ground truthing SnowX, a way of matching up what the airborne instruments see and what is actually sitting on the surface. The ultimate goal of SnowX is to figure out what the best combination of instruments would be for a future satellite mission in order to get a global picture of snow.
We need to know how much snow is in a snowpack, because if we had too much snow and the snow melts too fast, then you can get flooding. And if you don't have enough snow, or if the snow melts too early, that can lead to a longer wildfire season, a more intense drought, and we need to know these things for water resource planning.
After we had a record that was about 15-20 years long, we started noticing that the extent of the ice in the Arctic was getting smaller over time.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Coastal water forecast here for the southern coast of the Panhandle. West to northwest winds down to about 15 knots, and then on the north coast, south to southeast winds anywhere from 15 to as high as 30 knots. And for Lynn Canal Glacier Bay, southeast winds 10 knots, and light variable winds over the central inside waters back to northwest at 10 knots for Clarence Strait. And a little bit more of a breeze over the inside waters on Wednesday for Clarence Strait. Southeast coming up 20 knots. Seas building to 7 feet. Otherwise, central and northern areas, north winds 15 knots. Seas around 3 feet. Small craft advisories for the most of the coastline here for the central and south coast. Southeast 30 knots. Seas around 10 feet. East winds 30 to 40 knots for the north coast. Seas 10 to 12 feet. And for Prince William Sound, east winds 30 knots tomorrow, seas 6 feet. And for the eastern North Gulf Coast, east winds at 30 knots. And the western North Gulf Coast, northeast at 20. Barren Islands, northwest winds 25 knots. And west winds at 25 for Kamishak Bay. Cook Inlet, east at 15 for northern Cook Inlet, southern Cook Inlet, northwest at 20. And then for the day on Wednesday, Cook Inlet, small craft advisories, north winds 25 to 30 knots, northwest 30-knot winds for Kamishak Bay, Barren Islands north at 30 knots, North Gulf Coast, east winds 30 to 35 knots, and Prince William Sound still winds out of the east at 30 knots with 7-foot seas. Kodiak Island, west winds 15 to 20 knots for the day Tuesday. Alaska Peninsula, south winds 25 knots, seas around 10 feet in Bristol Bay, southeast southeast winds at 20 knots. And then for Wednesday, Kodiak Island, northwest winds 30 to 35 knots, seas up to 11 feet, and west winds 30 to 35 knots for the Alaska Peninsula, seas running anywhere from 8 to 16 feet, and Bristol Bay, northwest winds at 30 knots. For the eastern Aleutians, pretty windy day coming up for the day on Tuesday. West-southwest winds 45 to 50 knots. Good gales here also for the central Aleutians. Northwest at 40 knots, and west-northwest winds 30 to 35 knots for the western Aleutians. Then on Wednesday, southwest winds and west-southwest winds 25 knots west of Kiska Island there. Adak and Atka looking at a west wind at 30 knots, and the eastern Aleutians gale force westerlies at 35 knots. Southwest coast tomorrow, south to southeast winds 20 knots. Brisk wind advisories for St. Lawrence Island and Norton Sound tomorrow. Northwest winds at 30 knots for the Herbeloff Islands and St. Matthew Island. Much lighter winds with southwest breeze at 20 knots. And then for Wednesday, St. Matthew Island, northern Bering Sea, west winds 25 knots, about the same for the Prebeloffs, call it west at 30. And for the southwest coast, west winds 15 to 20 knots, strongest south of Nunivak Island, and down to 10 knots here for St. Lawrence Island out of the west, and south at 10 for Norton Sound. And up to the eastern Boulevard Sea coast, we'll call it light and variable winds for tomorrow on the east side there. Central coast southeast at 15, southeast 20 for the western Arctic coast. And for the Chukchi Sea, say from Cape Beaufort to Wales, south to southeast winds 30 to 35 knots. Those come down to 15 to 20 knots there for Wednesday. Otherwise, the western Arctic coast, southeast at 15, east winds 10 knots for the central Arctic coast, all the way to demarcation point. And for tonight, again, this front weakening, really becoming weak through this area, so I wouldn't look for much snowfall with that at all. Maybe some areas of light snow or flurries and minimal accumulations, but gusty winds continue tonight with the blizzard warning St. Lawrence Island, Bering Strait coast, but improving over the Yukon Delta late tonight, but snow and blowing snow all the way up to the western Brooks Range. Weak low develops south of the Kenai Peninsula, increases chance of snow, Prince William Sound. This system here deepens and takes off to the east-southeast, and pretty good gradient here over the western eastern Aleutians tomorrow. Cold air coming down, so snow, gusty winds, and some of that snow starting to spill into Kodiak late in the day. Cloudy with areas of light snow showers or rain and snow showers here for the North Gulf Coast, but pretty dry over the interior, not bad for the Panhandle. Increasing rain for the southeast coast on Wednesday. Areas of snow, heaviest western Prince William Sound, southern Kenai Peninsula area into Turnagain Arm, and gusty winds begin to move into Kodiak Island late in the day as this low, well, actually depending on where that low center tracks exactly, but areas of snow up to the northwest. Dry over the upper Tanana Valley, 40-mile country to the eastern Arctic coast.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.